Yo guys, we are back with some more Ace Attorney videos, and today we are going back to the very beginning with the First Turnabout. Now, if you've been around the channel for a while, you know that I do case reviews. Basically, I'm going through all the Ace Attorney games and giving each case its own video in the form of a review. So far, I've gone through Ace Attorney 1, Ace Attorney Justice for All, and the Great Ace Attorney Duology. I'll link the playlist below if you want to see those videos. But you might be wondering, why have I gone back to the First Turnabout? This is a case I've already made a video on, so why make another one? Well, I don't think my Ace Attorney 1 reviews are that good. The videos themselves are rushed from a production standpoint, it's a bit hard to listen to, and although I still agree with a lot of the points I made, I think I could have analyzed the cases more in depth, and that is why I'm going to remake case videos for the first game. These are not going to be made in some set time period. For example, I won't release all of them by the next 4 months. I'll just make a video for each case whenever I feel like it. So here is the remake for the First Turnabout. My good friend T-Bone415 made a video saying the First Turnabout is the perfect tutorial. So I want to put that to the test. I'll put a link to his video down below, it's a good watch. And we'll analyze the First Turnabout for how well it teaches the game mechanics, but we'll also look at how good it is as a standalone case, and rate it out of 10 as usual. One of the First Turnabout's standout elements is its quick pace. It is straight to the point. The writer of the game, Shu Takumi, said he wanted the player to have a quick experience that laid out the basic gameplay to grab their attention. The First Turnabout is his way of showing what Ace Attorney is at its core, and I think he did a really good job at this. The First Turnabout wastes no time. It reveals the killer instantly, which can be a shock for a mystery game, and it sets up a few main characters. We get an inkling of the main character's motivation for becoming a lawyer. He tells us that the defendant, Larry Butts, is one of the reasons he became an attorney, which is shocking because once Larry Butts opens his mouth, it's hard to see why Phoenix has this guy as his best friend and why he would owe this man a favor. This is very good, concise character work, but what I'm really interested in talking about is the gameplay. We get introduced to one of the mechanics right away, that being multiple choice prompts. They start very simple, but that's exactly how it should be. Before I played this game, I didn't know what a defendant was, so it's good that it's the first question. It's a term that's used again and again throughout the series, and this tutorial hammers that in your head. We then have a multiple choice question asking us the victim's name, but the problem is, we've never heard anyone say her name. However, this is yet again an exceptional tutorial because it teaches us how to check the court record. After this, we get a small segment with Larry Butts on the stand. You could argue that this part doesn't need to be in the case, as no progress is made. Basically, Winston Payne asks leading questions to make Larry say bad things about his now dead girlfriend, which shows Larry's motive. Even though no progress is being made deduction-wise, I strongly believe this is an important part to show off in the first case. It shows off Ace Attorney's comical tone very well. We got a jumpy defendant who's constantly panicking, and Phoenix is telling him to lie like a dog because he's a novice that has no idea how to handle the situation either. It also does make you feel sorry for Larry. The guy's on trial and he was cheated on, and it's important that we connect with Larry because he's a key player for the overarching story. But now we get to the meat of the case, which is the cross-examination of Frank Sawit. The thing I like most about this cross-examination is how we see that unraveling one lie at a time can corner a culprit. We start with the simple contradiction of Sawit not being able to find a body at 1 PM because the victim died between 4 to 5 PM. At first sight, this contradiction is basic and doesn't leave an impression. There is satisfaction in seeing Sawit on the ropes as he scrambles for an explanation, but I think a lot of people, including myself, may write this contradiction off when we first see it. We just see it as a lie from Frank Sawit because he's the true killer and he's nervous, so he remembered the facts wrong. But there is a lot more to it than that. 1 PM wasn't some arbitrary time. There is a reason he said 1 PM, and this whole batch of testimonies loops back to this very first contradiction. Sawit hurries to think of an explanation as to why he said 1 PM in order to appear as trustworthy as possible, and in this hurried attempt, he understandably lies once more. He claims that he heard the television say it was 1 PM, however that's not true because there was a blackout at that time. And then he says the murder weapon is what said the time and also refers to it as a clock, but from what we can see, the murder weapon doesn't look like a clock. It doesn't seem like there's any way for Sawit to know this is a clock, so he tries sounding it and realizes the only way to hear the weapon say the time is to hold it in your hands. Sawit claimed he never went into the room, which is now clearly a lie. He's touched the murder weapon, and the weapon also stated a time that was 3 hours slower to the current time. This solves the mystery of why Sawit said it was 1 PM. Through a series of contradictions, the case loops back together and all mysteries are solved, and I honestly struggle to think of a case that does this as well as the First Turnabout. I think it's because the First Turnabout is so fast and simple. It's easy to see that process of how a single lie leads to a string of lies that will catch the culprit. With later cases, the gameplay gets more complex and lengthy, which makes it hard to think of that process in your head. It's going to be tough remembering how you got from point A to point B, and we have to remember in later cases, it's not just you and the killer. There are other witnesses who are honestly trying their best to get the facts right, or have other problems, which leads to unreliable testimony. It's not just this one string of lies that all come together. There are a lot of variables, but with the First Turnabout, you just have the killer in the simple setup, and that's why I think the First Turnabout is a nearly perfect tutorial. I do have one small gripe, and that is pressing. In this case, you do not need to press for more information, and honestly I think that's good because presenting evidence back to back just feels fun and the progression is quick and exciting. My gripe is that you have this button on the screen and you don't know what to do with it. The game doesn't tell you why it's there and how it works. In my head, this would be a bit confusing to new players. In my case, this didn't apply because I actually played the First Turnabout with my brother. He had already finished the game and led me on the right path for the First Turnabout, so I wasn't too confused on what to do, but I could imagine this being the case for at least some players. Some people may be scared to press the button. Some may think you need it to progress, and it's kind of a distraction. I honestly feel like they should have taken the pressing button out of the case, because even the pressing dialogue isn't very fun. It seems quite basic, and doesn't have the same humor that they do in later cases. However, that's my only issue, hence why I say that yes, as a tutorial for the game mechanics, the case is basically perfect. To answer the question of the video, I agree with T-Bone415. The First Turnabout is as great as it can be in terms of teaching the gameplay. But does that mean it's perfect as a standalone case? Well, no, but I think that's obvious. It is lacking in some areas. Namely, I don't think some of the characters are good, and I don't think it has an interesting premise. When we look at the characters, I think some of them are just kind of bland. Characters like Payne and Sawit are just kind of there. There's nothing too fun about them. They're just generic prosecutor and culprit respectively. Even the judge is generic. Sure, he gets really good in later cases and later games, but in his first appearance, there is nothing that stands out about him. Mia is mildly entertaining during moments where she can't believe how incompetent Phoenix is. Phoenix is also mildly entertaining, with some moments like when he tells Larry to lie like a dog, and then the star of the show is the Butts himself. Seriously, Larry is the best character in the case. Remember how I was talking about the segment with him on the stand, and how I felt like it was a worthy addition? This is why. Larry is given the most character. We get to see him at his lows as a defendant, he gets depressed, we see his anger towards his girlfriend, we see goofy moments like him trying to telepathically communicate with Phoenix and fail, and then we get the post-trial where he's acting like a jerk to Phoenix after he saved him, which again brings us back to the question of why Phoenix and Larry are best friends, and why Phoenix became a lawyer because of him. But soon after, we see how these things are possible. Larry pulls himself together, gets serious, and talks about how he got played by his ex. He says the victim never really cared about him, and then we get a cool segment where we have to present evidence to prove him wrong. This was a genius idea. They continue this trend for many cases, and it's great because it allows you to end the case on a satisfying and strong note. People tend to remember how they feel at the very end of a case, so if the ending portion leaves a good impression, that is a big factor for how much someone likes the case. And in the First Turnabout, we get this moment where we present the murder weapon because Cindy Stone would not take this heavy clock with her if Larry didn't mean anything. She easily could have brought a watch with her if she needed something to tell the time, and with Larry convinced, he tells Phoenix that he's happy he asked him to be his lawyer. By the end of the case, we see how Phoenix and Larry are best friends. Sometimes Phoenix matches the goofiness of Larry, as we see with his telepathic communication, and we see that Larry trusts Phoenix a lot. As we just heard, Larry picked Phoenix to be his lawyer, even though this is Phoenix's first case. Larry could have picked someone a lot better, but he chose a novice, which shows how close they are. With someone who trusts you that much, and the ability to become serious when the time calls for it, I think we can see how it's possible that Larry was the reason for why Phoenix picked his career path. This post-trial does a lot for both Phoenix and Larry as characters, and actually made me tear up when I replayed it a year ago. I don't know if I teared up because I knew about the events of Turnabout Goodbyes. I don't know if it's because I was playing the first Ace Attorney after 5 years, but either way, I wouldn't have had an emotional reaction if the writing in this post-trial wasn't strong. So we've covered the characters, and now let's talk about the premise. When I say the premise isn't very strong, I'm just saying that going to a basic murder case for your first day in court doesn't sound that interesting. The one part of the premise I do think succeeds is showing the criminal. It's unexpected, and we're left anticipating for the moment we see this man in the game. But other than that, it's kind of just a normal day in court. Compare this to a game like 999. If you haven't played 999, don't worry, I won't spoil anything, and I'll try to explain this the best I can. 999 has a similar tutorial to Ace Attorney where it gets you into the gameplay right away. And that gameplay is fun and is taught well. But what gives 999 a huge advantage in terms of immersion and overall fun is the premise. The game starts off with a lot of suspense, it puts you in a crazy situation where you have a number of questions, and even develops this interesting scenario a lot more in the middle of the gameplay. 999's tutorial case, in other words, is like a 9 out of 10. And I'm not just saying that because it's called 999. But then I think about Ace Attorney, and I just don't think it can do that. I don't think Ace Attorney should start out very dark and suspenseful. That's not really the tone of the game. It needs the goofiness and lightheartedness in its first case to represent the series. So the premise isn't great, but I feel like it kind of has to be that way, and that's okay. This means I don't think the case can really score as high as 999's intro, but it's doing really good for what it is and what it needs to be. Remember, Shu Takumi said he wanted this case to represent Ace Attorney at its core. He could have started the First Turnabout as a dark and highly suspenseful case, but would that represent the series? It would feel weird if the First Turnabout was like that and the rest of the game didn't match its tone. Usually with Ace Attorney, it takes some time to escalate to those darker and suspenseful moments, so although the premise isn't super interesting, I would not change it at all. It is perfectly fine the way it is. The only other critiques I would have about the case are near the end of Saw's confrontation. And actually, these are things that go for the entire series, but it's still something I personally don't like. The first one isn't a huge deal, but it does get annoying in later cases. It's moments where the protagonist will say something first and then prove it second. So for example, in this case, after Saw slips up about how the murder weapon is also a clock, Phoenix says the only way he could have heard the time is by holding the clock while hitting Cindy Stone on the head. It's only after Phoenix makes this accusation where we actually sound the clock to make sure this is the case. The reason I don't like this is because it feels like Phoenix is going too fast. While Phoenix is concluding the case, I'm here thinking, well, wait a minute. What if the clock automatically says the time at every hour without you needing to touch it? You think of these different possibilities, and you get that feeling where you tell the game to slow down. So I'd like it if they first prove what they're saying, and then make the accusation. Most people probably won't care about this, but I just personally do, so let's leave it at that. The second thing is the moment right after the court hears that the clock is 3 hours slow. This explains why Sawit said it was 1 PM when it should have been 4 PM, but Sawit counters our point. He says, how can we prove that the clock was 3 hours slow on the day of the murder? And the game basically says if we can't do this, then it's over. We cannot say Sawit is guilty, and we cannot say Larry is innocent, and I don't really like this. First, the thing we have to prove is very specific, and I looked at this and went, damn, this can go very wrong if all witnesses have this power. Like, if they find very specific ways to counter arguments like this, and then the case ends if we can't find a way to deal with it, that's a little crazy. Thankfully, we don't exactly have to prove that the clock was 3 hours slow, we just have to find any reason, and that's when we present the passport, compare time zones, and figure out the clock was 9 hours fast. But I think what I dislike the most about this is the fact that this is an all or nothing moment. It just feels weird that we lose the case if we can't answer this one specific question. It feels like they just try to raise the stakes artificially, and I felt weirded out by the moment rather than it being some suspenseful moment where the case reaches its climax. I know the Ace Attorney courtroom itself is kind of crazy and all the zaniness is fine. It gives Ace Attorney a lot of its charm, but I still think there needs to be some kind of structure to Ace Attorney's trials. I think I'll save that for another video though, since explaining why I want some structure would take quite a long time. And before you say Ace Attorney is a parody of the Japanese legal system, so it's fine if nothing makes sense, no it's not. Shu Takumi himself said, it's not a parody or some type of commentary. This was just a myth that spread around the Ace Attorney fanbase for years, and now it's the common belief. The last thing I want to talk about is Phoenix and Mia. Phoenix and Mia have this relationship where I'd say they're closer than coworkers. There are moments where Phoenix refers to Mia by her name and then corrects himself and refers to her as Chief in order to stay professional. They get drinks to celebrate Larry Butts' innocence, so I'd say they're good friends, but that being said, it's not enough to feel very connected to Mia. So things were done to get a sense of how that relationship is, but it's kinda just there. What I do like is the setup. Mia is given the murder weapon, the Thinker statue, and that would lead the player to question, why is she getting this? What is the purpose of the scene? Why is the game showing us this? And how will it play into the game later on? And then the game finishes with a very ominous cliffhanger where Phoenix says he cannot tell Mia the story of why he wanted to become a lawyer. It's a really good hook for the next case that would want to make anyone keep playing. So really solid finish to the case right there. And that's about it. I give this case a 6.5 out of 10, which means I consider it to be decent. I think the first time I made this review, I actually gave it a 6, so I do think I underrated it quite a bit. It's perfectly fine for a standalone case, and I'd say it's better than quite a few of the full-length cases in this series. It has moments where you don't feel much of anything, like there are some moments where it feels like you're kind of just pressing a button and looking at something very basic, but underneath that, it has quite a few impactful moments and a really well made tutorial. If you guys liked the video, hit the thumbs up, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. I have an interesting short about the First Turnabout, so I'll link that below if you want to see that. As I said before, link to T-Bone415's video on the First Turnabout. If you guys want to see other case reviews, I have a whole playlist for reviews of the cases in the Great Ace Attorney, and a playlist for Justice for All. I'll link those as well, and you may even be able to find it somewhere on the screen. But yeah, that's about it. Goodbye.